Hey everyone, welcome to Epic Life Church. Whether this is your first time joining us, or you've been joining us for quite a while, we're just glad that you're tuned in today. And if you're from around the Portland area, you'll relate to this, but it's been a hot one this week. It's been a doozy. I think 3 days that neared or reached 100 degrees, that's really hot for us. If you're from the Midwest, the South, or from the East Coast, you probably think we're sissies, but man, it's been a doozy. And by the way, if you're from the Midwest or the East Coast, thanks for sending the weather our way. I know it was hot earlier on for you guys, and now we're experiencing it. It's been so hot this week that I finally broke down and unpacked the window AC unit from the garage and installed it this week because I could not take the heat any longer. But now that that is running freely and is cooling down our bedroom, things are great at the Martindale household. You know, we are looking forward to next week because it's supposed to be a little bit cooler, a little bit more manageable, and still sunny. And so I'm looking forward to this week and hope you are too, whatever part of the country you're from. You know, we are kicking off a brand new series today that I've been excited for a long time called The Art of Neighboring. It's going to be a 4-week series followed by what we're calling the Good Neighbor Project, which will happen on August 30th. And we're going to cancel our online services that day, get out into the community and serve. You'll hear more about that like you just did a bit ago. But as we dive into today's topic, I called today Love Thy Neighbor. We're talking about our neighbors and how we can show them love. And as we do that, I want to share with you, kind of tell a little story on myself. When our youngest daughter when my wife was still pregnant with I can't talk. When my wife was still pregnant, there it is. I'm going to stop right now and talk slow. When my wife was pregnant with our youngest daughter. There, I got it out. I was doing a home improvement project, and I remember one night I was out sawing on our porch in our driveway area. And it was 11 o'clock at night. I had a skill saw out, and I was too loud to do it in our garage. I don't know what the thinking was on that. And I had earplugs in because it was so loud. And I'm going to town at 11 o'clock at night, and I look up after I finished the saw cut to a neighbor walking over from across the street who had young children whose windows were right outside of where I was cutting. And she very politely, but I could tell holding back maybe a little bit of emotion, was like, "Can you tell me how long you're going to be doing this for?" And I was like kind of mortified when I realized it's 11 o'clock. I was a night owl, so it didn't seem late to me. And here she's got these young children. I'm keeping them up late because I was sawing all the stuff out front. So I immediately quit my sawing and went inside, apologized to her for that. And, I do have many other great stories of being a good neighbor where I've been able to help my neighbors, but that's one I can think of where I was like, I'm mortified when I think that I was sawing at 11 o'clock at night. And so I guess we all need grace at times, and we all kind of mess up in that area. But we're talking about the art of neighboring, and there really is an art to it. And in fact, Jesus talks about being a good neighbor in the Bible. There's a passage of Scripture I'd like us to look at that's been dubbed the Great Commandment. And before we get to that, I want to give you a little bit of backstory on it. But this teacher of religious law, kind of like a religious lawyer, if you will, came up to Jesus and was testing him. They were trying to trap him. Came up to him and said, "Jesus, out of all the stuff in the Bible, what's the most important thing that is there? Boil it down to the most important thing. Give us the Cliff Notes. What's the most important thing in the Bible?" They're trying to trip him up. And so that's where you pick up in this passage, and I'd like you to read along with me on this. Here's what it says in Matthew chapter 22. Jesus replied, "You must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind." That might be something you'd expect. That's obvious. But then he goes on to say, this is the first and greatest commandment. The second is equally important. Love your neighbor as yourself. The entire law and all the demands of the prophets are based on these two commandments. Jesus boils down the entire Bible into two statements: love God and love others. Love God with all your heart, mind, and soul. Love your neighbor as yourself. And in fact, that phrase, love your neighbor, is used 10 different times throughout the Bible. And it's been stated, love your neighbor, and not only just love your neighbor, but love your neighbor as yourself. And so as we get into this talk about the art of neighboring, and we get into talking about loving your neighbor, what does that actually look like? We need to kind of define what we're talking about when we think of neighbor. Now, I want to show you just kind of quick animation on the screen here to kind of show you what we think of when we think of our neighbors. This here is a neighborhood, a classic neighborhood, and let's just pretend this is your house right here. And so we think of our neighbors as being the people over here and here and here and here and there. And that is our neighbors. But I think what Jesus is talking about when he tells us to love our neighbors is much more than that. And so there's a story I want to talk to you about from actually the Gospel of Luke. Luke was an author of the Bible, and he writes in the book of Luke this story we've titled it The Good Samaritan. You may have heard it before. When you hear of somebody being a Good Samaritan, or you think of like a hospital that's called the Good Samaritan Hospital, those are coming from this story. This story is what made those things popular and famous. And so there's this story, another time when an expert in religious law stood up, and by the way, this isn't in your notes, just listen to me as I read this. He stood up to test Jesus by asking him this question. He said, "Teacher, what should I do to inherit eternal life?" Jesus replied, "What does the law of Moses say? How do you read it?" The man answered, I could just think there's a little bit of smugness because he's an expert in religious law. He says, "You must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your strength, and all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself." "Right," Jesus told him. So he got it right, and the guy's probably like, I did pretty good for myself. He said, "Do this and you will live." Then the guy should have stopped there, but he went on to say, the man wanted to justify his actions, Luke says, so he asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" He probably shouldn't have asked that question because he opened up a little can of worms for himself in that statement, because Jesus goes on to tell this story of the Good Samaritan. Jesus' response to who his neighbor was the story of the Good Samaritan, and here's how it goes. Jesus replied with a story. A Jewish man was traveling from Jerusalem down to Jericho, and he was attacked by bandits. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him up, and left him half dead beside the road. Now, you got to understand, in those days, the towns were sparsely spread out, and it was dangerous to travel a road between towns because there wasn't a lot of traffic, a lot of people around to see if someone wanted to rob you or beat up on you or do whatever to you. And so when you were traveling, it was actually often a dangerous thing to travel. But this guy happened to be on a path that the bandits came out, and they robbed him, stripped him of his clothes, and beat him. The author says, half to death. Goes on to say, by chance, a priest came along. Now, this guy was a Jewish man. A priest was also a Jewish rabbi, a Jewish person who was a religious leader. He says, but when he saw the man lying there, he crossed to the other side of the road and passed him by. Then he goes on to say a temple assistant, someone also who worked who was a Jewish person who worked in the temple, walked over and looked at him lying there, but he also passed by on the other side. Then Jesus goes on to say, a despised Samaritan came along, and when he saw the man, he felt compassion for him. Going over to him, the Samaritan soothed his wounds with olive oil and wine and bandaged them. That'd be the equivalent today of maybe a little peroxide and some triple antibiotic ointment and a Band-Aid. Think that way, but bigger, of course, because the guy was beat almost half to death. It says, then he put the man on his own donkey and took him to an inn where he took care of him. The next day he handed the innkeeper 2 silver coins, telling him, take care of this man. If his bill runs higher than this, I'll pay you the next time I'm here. Now, which of these would you say was a neighbor to the man who was attacked by bandits? Jesus asked as he wraps up this story. Here's the man's reply. The one who showed him mercy. Then Jesus said, yes, now go and do the same. See, when Jesus is talking about loving our neighbors, he's not just talking about the people that live close to us in proximity to us, although it includes those people. But it's kind of like dictionary.com. I went on dictionary.com just curious what the definition of neighbor was on dictionary.com, and it says a person who lives near another. This is what we would expect. But I was not expecting that there was 3 different definitions, and one of the definitions in dictionary.com for a neighbor was one's fellow human being. Wow. Essentially all mankind. That's your neighbor. So in your notes, if you're following along, you can write this in if you got the paper notes in front of you, or if you just want to follow along on the notes tab on the screen there. Who is my neighbor? My neighbor is everyone. My neighbor is everyone that I come in contact. It doesn't matter if they look like us or act like us. It's not someone necessarily who talks like us or even speaks the same language as us. It's not finding the people closest to us or the people that we get along with the most and we call them our neighbors. See, that's what this man wanted to do, this religious expert in the law. He wanted to justify his actions because I'm sure in his mind, his neighbors were the easy people to get along with, the people closest to him, maybe family, friends, the people around him in his circle that he got along with, the people that he had a lot in common with. But Jesus goes on to say, well, you can't justify yourself with that because your neighbor is everybody. Your neighbor is everyone that you come into contact with. I'd like to share with you today, as we spend some time together, a blueprint for how you love your neighbor well. And so if you'll follow along in your notes, here we go. The first thing we need to do is, number 1, is that we need to be observant. We need to be observant. See, there are opportunities to show love to our fellow woman or our fellow man all around us. They're always there. The opportunities are right in front of us. The problem is we're just too busy or we're too distracted to notice them. It's kind of like that animation I showed you of the neighborhood. We're going to put that back up on the screen here. And I want to show you this neighborhood, and here's your house there. But if you were observant, if you stopped long enough, you might have noticed there's a moving van in front of the house next door. And we miss out on this stuff all the time. And maybe the proper thing we should do in this situation is go knock on the neighbor's door and welcome them to the neighborhood. Maybe, a batch of cookies once COVID is over. Maybe it's to go out and see if they need any help with anything. And we miss these things because we're always so busy or so distracted, or maybe we even see it, but it's like, I don't know if I got time to fit that in my day. I don't know if I want to open up that. But that's what we got to do. We got to realize it's not about looking for perfect conditions. It's about looking for the opportunities around us. In this story that we're looking at about the Good Samaritan, there are two likely candidates that in all intents and purposes should have helped the man out. But in Luke 10:33, here's what happens. And then before we get to that verse, we have the priest and the temple assistant who walk by on the other side of the road, but it's the Good Samaritan, the one who is least likely to be the one to help this guy out, the one who, by all means, because their cultures didn't get along, shouldn't have been there to help him out. It should have been the other two. They were the ones, shame on them, but this is the one who helped him out. And Jesus says this in Luke 10:33, then a despised Samaritan came along. Notice he says, not just a Samaritan, a despised Samaritan, because the Jews despise the Samaritan. So here's a Jewish guy, beat up, who naturally would be someone who despised the Samaritan. And he says when he saw the man, he felt compassion for him. Wow. He was observant of this situation. This guy needed help, and it didn't matter if this guy looked down on him. It didn't matter if this guy and his culture didn't naturally get along. It was the right thing to do. He was observant. He sought the situation and realized there was an opportunity to help. In order to serve people better, we need to know what's important to them. In this situation, the Samaritan recognized what was most important to this guy was to tend to his wounds and to help him mend him and get him back to health. The only way for us to be observant, by the way, and we struggle with this idea of being observant because we're so busy in life, is that we have to pause. We need to stop and listen. Are we listening to the people around us? Are we listening to what they're saying? Are we listening beyond their words and hearing the tone of voice, the inflection, their mood? Do we understand that maybe what they're saying is an actual reality? Like when you ask somebody how they're doing and say, I'm fine. It's different when they're like, oh, I'm doing great, versus, oh, I'm good. Do we just go off and that was just like a nice little greeting that we had with each other? Or do we pause and say, well, what's wrong? It sounds like something's up. Can I be of help to you? We got to first stop. We got to listen. That's one way to be observant. The other thing that we can do is that we can ask questions. Not only listen, but ask questions. Is there a way that I can help you? How can I serve you in this situation? Maybe ask some leading questions that help you understand their situation a little bit better so that when the opportunity presents itself to help them, you really understand what you're doing to help them out. And then the time of reflection. So first we listen, then we ask questions, then we reflect and ask ourselves, what have I learned from listening to them? What have I learned from asking questions? And then maybe what can I do to process this and help me to decide what's the best course of action I can take? That's how you be observant. Here's some questions you can ask yourself right now, just to kind of give yourself a test on how well you are being observant with the people around you. Do you know the names of your immediate neighbors? Now I'm talking about neighborhood again. The next door neighbors, the neighbors across the street. Do you know their names? Do you know who they are? How long have you lived next to them, and do you know anything about their life? Here's another question. Your coworkers, you work with them every day. Right now it's remotely, but you talk to these people all the time. Do you know anything about their life? Do you know if they're married or single? Do you know if they have kids? Do you know if their mom is in the hospital struggling for her life with cancer? Do you know these things? Do you have those conversations where you listen, where you ask questions? And then when the opportunities arise, you're able to reach in and help and be a part of the solution to what they're going through. Here's a question I have for you this week when you're approaching people this week that I want you to be asking subconsciously in your mind as you approach conversations with people. What can I do when you're thinking about these people? What can I do for you to add value to your life? Think about that person. Get them in your mind. What can I do for you to add value to your life this week? What can I do? So we be observant, and the way we do that is we listen, we pause, we ask these questions, we reflect, and we do this in order to love our neighbor. And the only way that you can love your neighbor well by being observant is you look for those opportunities to serve them. The second thing that we need to do is this. We need to seize the opportunity. Seize the opportunity. If you tuned in last week, you might have heard me say this. I'll say it again, so I think it fits this very well, but there was 5 frogs sitting on a log. 4 decided to jump off. How many were left? And that riddle, the obvious answer is 1. But the real answer is that no, there are 5 left, because deciding to jump off and actually jumping off are 2 different things. And in this situation, if you are observant and you see a problem or something someone you know needs help with, but you just observe it and you do nothing about it, what good is it? And like those frogs, deciding to jump off isn't doing anything. You're not being a part of the solution. You've got to seize the opportunity. See, the Good Samaritan stepped into immediate action when he realized that he observed that this guy needed help. And in Luke 10:34, it says this, going over to him, the Samaritan soothed his wounds with olive oil and wine and bandaged them. We already talked about that. That's, peroxide, triple antibiotic ointment, some bandages to try and help this guy, nurse him back to health. If you want to make an impact in someone's life, be the first person to show up in their time of need. See, in this situation, there was a priest who had an opportunity. There was a temple assistant who had an opportunity. He was the third person to come by, but he was the first person to take action. And I guarantee in this story, this Jewish guy who was beat up, he remembers that guy. He remembers the first person to step into action. When someone needs help in your life, they don't remember you when you're the third or fourth person to step in to help. Someone else does it, and then another person, and finally you're like, well, I should get on the bandwagon. People don't remember. That's not memorable. You're not making a huge impact in that person's life like being the first person. And when you see someone in your life who has a situation you can help with, you can serve them, you can do something to show love to them, be the first person to step into action. Seize that opportunity. The author Paul, as he writes to the ancient church in the town of Galatia, he asserts this in Galatians 6. He says, therefore, whenever we have the opportunity, we should do good to everyone. Whenever we have the opportunity, we should do good to everyone. We have this Art of Neighbor challenge that we're gonna put out to you every week of this series for the next 4 weeks. And so today, I just want to challenge you with 3 simple ideas for how you can be a good neighbor this week, how you can love your neighbor. The first one is this. If you have a neighbor in your neighborhood and you know them to maybe have health issues or they're elderly and they can't get out of their house, check in on them. Look for an opportunity to check in on a neighbor. Maybe you don't know them that well. Maybe this is a great opportunity for you to get to know them. So check in on somebody. That's an easy one. How about this one? This is another simple one, but send a thinking of you card. Now, you could send an email to somebody. You could send a text, and those are great. But I think what would make an even bigger impact right now in this digital age is to get an actual physical paper card. You know what those are? They're paper, and they open up, and you can actually write a note to them. And then you have to put them in an envelope and seal them up and put a stamp on it. And just being funny with you, but take it to the post office. And man, what that would mean to somebody who maybe feels forgotten or maybe feels lonely during this time where we can't be together all the time. And you write a card and send it to them that says, I'm thinking of you. I care about you. You were on my mind. Simple idea. How about this one? Take action. Seize the opportunity by signing up for this year's Good Neighbor Project. We already have over 40 people who have already signed up to be a part of this year's Good Neighbor Project, and you could be one of the first people to get involved to be a part of this, and I encourage you to do that. Sign up for the Good Neighbor Project, and you can put love into action on August 30th with us. So that's the Art of Neighboring Challenge this week. Stay tuned, because each week we're going to give you some more ideas on how you can do that. Now, as we're talking about seizing the opportunity, I want to share with you 2 things that I think are relevant to this conversation that I shared last week. The first one is the principle of immediate action. It goes like this. All things considered, the person who takes immediate action to solve any given problem will experience a much greater occurrence of success than those who hesitate. You see a need in someone's life, be the first person to step into action, and you will experience a much greater success at helping them, showing love to them, being an impact in their life over the person who waits and pauses on that. And another one that goes with that is the law of diminishing intent, which goes like this. The longer you wait to do something you should do now, the greater the odds are that you will never actually do it. You need to take action today, because that is how you find success in doing something to show love to someone else. You got to take immediate action. So the first thing we need to do is be observant. The second thing is to seize the opportunity. Here's the third thing we need to do. We need to do whatever it takes. Do whatever it takes. Accept no excuses. Don't talk yourself out of doing it. It's so easy to do that. You get self-conscious about helping somebody out and you talk yourself out of it. Or you come up with reasons why you shouldn't. Don't limit yourself to when it's convenient or when it's comfortable. Don't look for perfect conditions. Instead, commit to whatever is necessary to love on and show love to the people in your life, the people around you, the people who this week, by all intents and purposes, are your neighbor. Don't look for those easy, perfect conditions to come around. I've got news for you. Showing love to the neighbors, the people around you, is not always convenient. It's not always comfortable. It's not always instantly gratifying. It's not always going to be the thing that you love to do the most. But I can tell you this, that in doing so, you will eventually, I said not instantly gratifying, but you will find much gratification out of knowing that you're making a difference in the lives of someone else, that you're living out, being in the hands and feet of Jesus to the lives of someone around you. Let's go to the words of Solomon, who was an ancient king in the nation of Israel. And in the Old Testament of the Bible, in the book of Proverbs, he writes these words. He says in Proverbs 3, he says, "Do not withhold good from those who deserve it when it's in your power to help them. If you can help your neighbor now, don't say, 'Come back tomorrow and then I'll help you.' Take action. Be the person to step in and do whatever it takes, and do it right now if that's necessary." Let's look at our Good Samaritan story in Luke chapter 10:34. We just read moments ago. Verse 34 says, "Going over to him, the Samaritan soothed his wounds with olive oil and wine and bandaged them." So we read that. But he goes on to say, the author goes on to say, Jesus said this. He said, "Then he put the man on his own donkey and took him to an inn." See, it was already enough that he bandaged him and put ointment on his wounds. Then he throws him on his donkey and he takes him to an inn and goes on beyond that. He says he took care of him, and then the next day he handed the innkeeper 2 silver coins, telling him, "Take care of this man. If the bill runs higher than this, I'll pay you the next time I'm here." Wow. That is doing whatever it takes. That's going above and beyond. See, maybe the average person would say, well, the what's acceptable thing to do would be to bandage his wounds up. That's a nice thing, and then go on your merry little way. I can guarantee this traveler was not going along this path looking for an opportunity to stop and help somebody and detour him, to take him to an inn, spend money on the inn, give the innkeeper money, and check on him, and come back again after doing business, coming back and checking on him. And again, that was not in the Good Samaritan's schedule. It's not always convenient to help those people in need. The timing is never perfect. You just have to jump and do it when you know it's right. In this story, not only did he put him on the donkey and carry him to an inn, which I'm sure slowed down his traveling process, he puts him up in an inn, pays for the inn, stays with him and helps him, and then when he has to leave, he gives the innkeeper 2 silver coins. Now, in the Bible, there's a little footnote for those 2 silver coins. Each one of those coins is worth a day's wages. And I did the math, I was just curious. Based on Oregon minimum wage, 8-hour day, 1 day's wages is around $100. He gave the innkeeper $200, plus put him up in the inn and said, take care of whatever he needs. Would you do that for a complete stranger? Especially someone who you would consider to be on the other side of the social or political spectrum from you? Would you be willing to step in and do whatever it takes to serve somebody, to show them love? And I'm challenged when I read this story and think, that's what it's like to be a good neighbor. That's what it's like to go the extra mile. That's what we need to do. We got to go beyond the expected. And remember that we as a church, we talk about Epic Life Church being going beyond ordinary to extraordinary. That is how you get to an extraordinary life. It's going above and beyond, going beyond what is expected, and doing whatever it takes to serve other people. Much of what it takes to success, by the way, and doing what it takes is really about attitude and mindset. It really has to do with how we perceive our situation and how we go into it. And remember this, that if you can just have the mindset that I'm going to do whatever it takes in any given situation, when the opportunity presents itself for me to serve someone, and you just do whatever it takes, then it makes the job of doing that so much more easy, because your mindset is already there, and you realize, I'm going to have detours in my life. It's going to cost me a little money here. It's going to be inconvenient here, because you're ready for that. You're expecting that. When people ask me right now, I hear a lot of people saying, why is there so much unrest in the world right now? So much going on. So much that just feels like everything's unsettled. Why is there so much evil everywhere? I think my answer to that question has to be this, that I think that there are not enough people right now showing radical love, radical unconditional love in the name of Jesus. I think right now the people who are just doing whatever they think they want to do, or whatever they think is, they think this is right, is jumping on that bandwagon. There's too many people who are only looking out for their own interests and not for the interests of other people. We need more people to step in with radical love and show that love to other people. We have to exercise grace, patience, love, forgiveness, understanding, servanthood. The list could go on of the ways that we can express God's love in radical ways to people. And I've said this before, but I believe love wins out. Love is our most dangerous weapon in combating the evil and combating the unrest that is going on in our world right now. I've said it before, but I'm going to keep beating this drum, that if we want to see change, I believe that change has to start with us. It's not the job of politicians. It's not the job of our civic leaders. It's not the job of Hollywood. It's not the job of business leaders. It's all of us. It's all of our responsibility. And if we want to change stuff, we have to start with us. If you want to change the world, you can't do that until you start with changing your nation. If you want to change your nation, you can't do that until you start with changing your region. If you want to change your region, you can't do that until you start with changing your city. If you want to change your city, you can't do that until you first worked on changing the community. If you want to change the community, you can't do that until you first worked on changing your own family. If you want to change your family, you can't do that until you first work on changing yourself. It all starts with us. And the only way to change ourselves is to change the things that we do daily. Our daily habits every day in our life. That's what today's talk is about. Every week it's about learning ways that we can change our daily habits so that we can change ourselves, so that we can change our family, so that we can change our community, and goes on changing the world. That's what it's about. You know, in our notes, I want to point out to you some reflection questions for ways that you can maybe put into action what we've talked about today. Reflection question number 1 is this: who is someone that I can be a good neighbor to this week? Simple. Ask the question, who is someone that I can be a good neighbor to this week? And the second one is, how can I be more observant this week to notice the needs of those around me? What can I do to stop, to pause, to slow down, to put margin in my schedule, to take notice of the people in my life and the situations where I can actually step in and show love in a radical way? In our story, to kind of wrap up the story, Jesus says this in Luke chapter 10, verse 36. He says, "Now which of these 3 would you say was a neighbor to the man who was attacked by bandits?" Jesus asked. The man replied, this is the religious leader, he replies back, "The one who showed him mercy." This is profound. Then Jesus said, "Yes, now go and do the same." I think that's like such a surprise. I kind of could expect Jesus to say that my neighbor is anybody out there. It's not just the people closest to me and the people who are like me. I can kind of see Jesus saying, you know, we have to reach out beyond our comfort zone. But the thing that kind of blew me away, and I've read this story many times, and what caught my attention this week as I was preparing this talk, is that Jesus says that the one who is a good neighbor is not the guy who was beat up, who is not like us. He says, no, you're the good neighbor when you're doing this profound thing of showing love to other people. He turns this thing on its head. He says that the neighbor is you. And the only way that you're a neighbor is not by being close to the people. It's by the way you serve them. It's by the way that you live out your faith. The religious expert was asking a question of how can I justify my actions towards the people that I don't really get along with, and say that I'm, feel good about myself because I'm helping those closest to me, the people that I agree with. And Jesus said, no, the neighbor is you, but it's only you if you serve and you serve well. Romans 12:21, we're going to close with this. The author Paul writes these words. He says, "Don't let evil conquer you, but conquer evil by doing good." Don't let evil overcome you in your life. Let love win out. Be a person who is very observant, who strikes and sees the opportunity when you see it available, who does whatever it takes to serve and show love to the people around you, considering them to be your neighbor. Don't let evil overcome you, but overcome evil with good. Would you pray with me? God, this morning, this talk is encouraging and at the same time very challenging to think about what we can do to love our neighbors. It seems almost simple, almost easy, and yet not. Because to serve people who are not like us, to serve people who don't agree with us, to serve people who are it's inconvenient to serve or to love on, man, that's tough. And I pray that you give each one of us the resolve to be committed to showing love to our neighbors this week, the people that we come in contact with, whether they are physical neighbors, or they're the person at the gas station, or the person who helped us out with our groceries today. God, we want to be neighbors, good neighbors to everybody we come in contact with. Help us to understand that the best way we show love to our neighbors is to being a good neighbor ourselves. Help us to live this out this week, and that we'd be able to make a measurable difference in the lives of the people that we come into contact with this week, that we'd be able to impact them in big ways. We thank you for this, God. We love you, and in your name we pray. Amen.